Well, it looks like we're, wow, look at that.
Well, some people are punctual.
Yeah, we got people who are live and ready to go. Well, we're going to get started. It's 10:30, and whenever possible, I like to get started right when the bell rings, you know. Welcome everyone. Uh, we have today a once again a very unique guest, a woman that I've known for it seems like just after the formation of the earth, you know, but when she was a mere child. Joyce Jefferson is our guest today, and Joyce has a very unique position in the land of South Dakota and the landscape. I you know I first met Joyce. Actually, I don't know if that was the first time I met her, but I know that we were doing some kind of program, and I never knew her about her Chautauquas and those kind of things. And so it's been very interesting watching her career, we might say, development, and watching her shows develop too. I've been at a couple of her performances, and she does something very unique. And I'm going to let her tell you more about it um, because I think you should hear it from her. But it's to say that it's the kind of performing she does to me is very unique in the sense that it actually brings news people can use. It brings especially the historical uh, narrative to talk about things and people and bring them alive, bring the people alive, so that we have some sense of the historical narrative instead of just having these kind of like snapshots, getting under the hood, so to speak, which I love to do in these kind of things, to just sort of really understand or have a better picture anyway. I don't know if you can ever get the complete picture, but having a more in-depth picture of our stories and the people who made up those stories. So often the history we get is made, we just get kind of like these tip of the iceberg things about people who really didn't do all that much. They just had better historians, people writing about them, but they might have had some idea or some impact, but it was nothing like the people who were in the day-to-day grind of living. And so with that, I'm going to welcome Joyce Jefferson, illustrious Chautauqua presenter, etc. Joyce, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I really appreciate your introduction of me.
Yeah. We're going to I think, just get into the 50,000-foot view, really, of who Joyce Jefferson is as a person. It's a little bit separate from what you're doing now. But tell us about, where you grew up, how you met, where you came from. Give us that elevator speech of who is Joyce Jefferson anyway?
When I first started in Humanities Council, I had to prepare an introduction for the people who would invite me to their events. So I would say that I was married to Earl, and he worked for the Forest Service at that time, that I was a child of the world because my father was in the Air Force. And I had the opportunity to go to kindergarten in Germany and to live many other places in our United States. I have 3 boys and they have 3 wives, and I have 6 granddaughters. Oh, wait, they don't all have 3 wives.
Some have only 2.
Yeah, but we're not Mormons, practicing Mormons. So
okay.
anyway, in that I had the opportunity to live everywhere. I also had an opportunity to learn more about my surroundings rather than be in one place and learn about that one place, which I have had the opportunity to do here in South Dakota. I also said that I got to South Dakota on the coldest day of the year. We came from Hawaii in the dead of winter. I had the opportunity to work at the Weather Squadron, and I went through all of their books. And yes, we did, in fact, come on the coldest day of the year. When we crossed the border, we saw the line that said, or not the line, we saw the state line, and there was this great big old sign that said, "Welcome to South Dakota." And I looked down, it was just so beautiful, you know, all of the frock trees and the little Bambis running around. And we made the first tracks into the state of South Dakota. And I knew then that this was really going to be an interesting tour of duty. As a matter of fact, it was my husband's last tour of duty from Hawaii to South Dakota, and the brochure said South Dakota of all places. And surely enough, it was South Dakota of all places. When I first got here, and I think I'm sharing a little bit too much, mini skirts were the thing.
In winter.
So I had just come from Hawaii. I had my mini skirts. So I went downtown to do some kind of business. I had on my long overcoat. I had not learned about layering then. I had on my long overcoat and my mini skirt, and I froze my legs off. So from that time on, I learned how to be a South Dakotan. You know, you layer your clothes, and I love South Dakota where I am because it's the banana belt. Sometimes it's going to be cold, but you always have a warm spring day in the winter in the Black Hills. So is that enough about?
Well, it's a good start. You know, I always like to have people say who they are in their own voice, because I think that just the way that they explain it tells as much sometimes as what they actually say. The things that you choose to bring to the top, that tells us, at least it tells me, who you think you are, you know, and that's the most important thing, is seeing you from the inside out. Let's turn now to your career, we can say, in asterisks, with the South Dakota Humanities Council. You've been with them for how long now?
I think it was since 1998, so it's not quite 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I prepared a PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay.
And for so many of my events, this one is just like those.
Okay.
I'm almost ready.
Okay. All right.
So
you mean with the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint is ready, but it's not timed and all that other good stuff. So
okay. All right.
Perhaps we can share the screen and I could put on my PowerPoint.
Okay.
And then
so
I'll run through it.
I think that's in Carolyn's bailiwick to do that.
Yep. So Joyce, on the bottom of your screen, where there should be a green arrow that says share screen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you click that, you should be able to choose your PowerPoint.
There we go.
You see it on your desktop? Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Okay.
And I don't know how much of it's showing.
It's all showing, but you'll have to push the play button so that all the other stuff
disappears.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there's some kind of play. This must be a Google Docs or something. Is this actual PowerPoint?
This is the actual PowerPoint. From current slide. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Now we're looking good.
So Welcome to the South Dakota Humanities Council, and I am so delighted to be a part of this unique organization. And I have not practiced what I'm going to say, so. The South Dakota Humanities Council has been in operation since a year after, or a year before I got to South Dakota in 1973. Oh, yes. So these are some of the views of the South Dakota Humanities Council.
Mhm.
And yes, it's been 50 years.
I'm only 50.
Well, you're our host, so I chose you as our host.
Okay, but
And
you
I
know,
have
go
been a
ahead.
part of the Humanities Council for my Chautauqua. That's me up in the left-hand corner. It might be your right, as Lucretia Marchbanks. In the middle is Sarah Campbell. And I work with two other women, and we call ourselves Dakota Daughters. And I guess you might see me on the right-hand side. That's my new favorite picture of me.
Okay.
So I came in 1998, and it all started when my husband and I went to the Fort Meade Museum. I don't usually tell that it was the Fort Meade Museum, but it's such a long time ago, and they have changed a lot, so I don't feel so badly about telling this story about the Fort Meade Museum. We walked around the museum and we looked for evidence of ourselves. And we could not find anything until we got to the very last exhibit. And there was this huge panoramic picture of buffalo soldiers astride horses. And they were all dressed in white. And uninformed at the time, I said, oh, we could only be cooks. Well, later I found out that this was a medical detachment, and more than likely they were medics who were on their way to the fields to help people instead of killing them with their food. So as we were leaving and going back to Ellsworth Air Force Base, I told my husband there's a lot of Black history in these hills and somebody ought to write about it. And little did I know at that time that I was speaking my future. So I was invited to speak for a Women's History Month engagement at the Black Hills National Forest. And I was reading one of these tired speeches that I think I could have fallen asleep to, as well as the audience. And afterwards, one of the members of the audience came up to me and asked me if I knew anything about Kate Reynolds. And I told him no. And he explained to me that she was an African-American homesteader who lived near Deadwood, and told me that there was going to be a passport in time excavation of her homestead in June, and asked me if I wanted to go. And I didn't know anything about a passport in time. I did know about June, and this was February, and I had not made up my mind. So when June rolled around, I said yes, and I went to the passport in time excavation. It was a 5-day thing, and on the last day, I dressed up in my Sojourner Truth clothes that I borrowed as Kate Reynolds. And I walked around her homestead, and the adults, they were really into my portraying Kate Reynolds because I saw all of the little red flags along the way, and I wanted to know what they were doing at on my land, and with all of those flags. And the little kids, they got me. They said, you're not really Kate Reynolds. But anyway, the archaeologists were very excited because sometime during the excavation, they found the crapper. That's what they called it. We found the crapper. And it seems like you can find so many artifacts and important things in the outhouse. So I learned about Catherine Reynolds. I started reading newspaper articles about her, and that was how I started to form my first Chautauqua, Kate Reynolds. Now, I had been out doing things and I don't know where I was, and I came back home and there was this message on my phone, and the director of the High Plains Heritage Museum or Center invited me to look at his African American collection. He had Ted Officer's gun. He had a lot of artifacts for African Americans in the hills at that time. And he wanted me to volunteer my time by riding from Rapid City to Spearfish 2 or 3 times a week to help him with the exhibition. Well, at that time, I was not as into history, and I thought that 2 or 3 times a week would be a lot for me to come from Rapid City to, and I'm pretty sure I could have learned quite a bit, but at that time I was not ready. So I mentioned to him, well, why don't you get a grant and then I could come? And he said, I don't believe in grants. And we parted ways because he didn't believe in grants and I didn't want to give my time at the time. And on the way to Rapid City, I kept saying to myself, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. And surely enough, there was. I got home, I called the Journey Museum. I talked to the executive director, Linda Clark, at the time, and I told her about my experience in Spearfish and asked her about helping me with sharing the history of African Americans in the Black Hills. Well, this is 1998. She said, oh, I am sorry. However, we project our exhibitions 2 years out. So how does 2000 sound to you? And at the time, I thought it was a real long time. However, it was not, because in those 2 years, we got a group of individuals who were interested in sharing the history of the Black Hills. We met almost weekly, scouring the hills, finding artifacts, pictures, and just interesting things about Blacks in the Black Hills. The exhibition was called Corporals, Cooks, and Cowboys, and it was a 6-week exhibition. And every week we had hands-on history. And I just had the most fun having worked with those individuals and watching it all come together. The Corporals, Cooks, and Cowboys exhibition became a book that Dr. Lila Pingra put together, and she sent it, or she took it to all of the libraries in South Dakota so that they could have, I think it was 2 copies. And if you go to libraries today, you may find a copy. Some did not keep the copies, but I think that was probably the most magnanimous thing she could have done. It is out of print now, and she said that there were a few errors in it, but I think it's still the most wonderful compilation of history of the Black Hills and surrounding area.
So did you use this book in your Chautauquas?
I did. And many times when I use the book, I find out a whole lot more in the book than I find online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it was very well written, and it helps me to tell the story a little bit more completely.
Mhm, mhm.
So during this time, I also crashed the Oscar Michaud Film Festival. And I'm not sure when the Oscar Michaud Film Festival crashed, but the first time I attended was either in 1998 or 1999. Uh-oh. Did I go back? I think I
Yeah,
went back.
yeah.
So when I went to the Oscar Michaud Film Festival, I was still trying on Kate Reynolds, and I had a presentation that I called Phenomenal Woman and Other Heroines at the time. And when I crashed the Oscar Michaud Film Festival, the promoters were here in Rapid City in February for Black History Month. They came to the Journey Museum and told all about the Oscar Michaud Film Festival and the things that they had been doing for the previous years, and invited everybody to come. Well, I was sitting in the audience next to one of the promoters, and I said, you really need to have me there, not knowing what I was getting myself into. So this is February, and I didn't hear anything from them until June. And I was getting kind of worried because I had offered to go and I didn't know what I was going to be doing when I went. So I ended up being on the program with Phenomenal Woman and Other Heroines. And I did that presentation and I walked around in Catherine Reynolds' clothes and interacting with people in character. At one of the lunches, the president of the board asked me if I had ever thought about joining the Humanities Council. Well, I had thought about it and I had been encouraged to do it, but the person that I contacted here in Rapid City said, oh, you have to have a master's degree in order to be considered for the Humanities Council. And I didn't have a master's degree, so I didn't think any more about it. But when I crashed the Oscar Michaud Film Festival and Carol Kurtzald said, what you have, Joyce, is so unique. We need you in the Humanities Council. And she also told me if I needed a recommendation that I didn't have to go looking for one, that she would give it to me. And it was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it.
Mm.
And my life is of many doors opening for me that probably I would have thought had been closed. So anyway,
it sounds like it was that meeting was a life-changing, pivotal event for you.
it was. I had been doing Phenomenal Woman and Other Heroines, and I was just practicing. And when I did it at the Oscar Michaud Film Festival, my husband was in the audience and he was helping me practice before the actual presentation. And he was pushing the buttons. He had his glasses on and he was pushing the buttons so my music would be just right. And I said something. He said, you forgot a line. I was like, oh, really? So I knew that he had been listening too. So when I finished, I was on the stage and I walked down into the audience and I took my bow and I stood up and everybody was standing up with me.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, pivotal, emotional. It was just everything. But anyway, I joined the Humanities Council and I joined as a Chautauqua performer. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Oscar Michaud. I went to the Oscar Michaud Film Festival probably almost every year after I crashed it the first year. The second year, I was asked to portray, I've got them out of order. So I'll come back to that. I was asked to portray someone with Sally Roche Wagner. So and this is the third woman in the middle. And we portrayed two people on a train having a conversation, and everybody enjoyed it so much. They said, Joe, you have to come back next year. And Sally Roach Wagner said, oh yes, we'll have a real little affair. We'll add more voices. And we invited Joyce L. Godfrey. And just like the year before, here it was June. I didn't know what was going on. I contacted Dr. Pengra again, and I said, well, what do you think we should do? And she said, well, there were Buffalo Soldiers, there were Euro-Americans, and there were Native Americans at the Wounded Knee Massacre. Maybe you could talk about that. So she gave me lots of information for me to be able to put my part together. And I have been doing a variation of that event for the last 20 years. We started out with Joyce L. Godfrey. When Sally Roach Wagner had to go back to New York, Lila Pengra took the reporter and Euro-American woman's place. And when Joyce L. Godfrey decided she needed to get her PhD, we invited Jerry Gozen Center. And then when Lila Pengra decided to leave the group, we invited Jerry's sister-in-law, Lil Witt. And those are the three people who are with that group now. These are other pictures that I have of my contributions to the Humanities Council. And I will go back one more because this was not a part of my being in the Humanities Council, but it was a part of something that led me to the Humanities Council. I was invited to come to Watertown, and we celebrated not a day off, a day on with Yolanda King, and I don't know where I am. Okay. So I was supposed to sing Abraham, Martin, and John, and If I Can Help Somebody, both related to Martin Luther King Jr. Well, I knew If I Can Help Somebody, so I didn't practice that one very much. But I was not as into Abraham, Martin, and John, so I drove all the way from Rapid City to Watertown singing, anybody here sing my old friend Abraham? And I kept driving and singing and driving and singing, and it never got any better, and I don't think it was any good today. And with the program there, no one could be on the stage at the same time as Yolanda King. So I did my part in the middle, and I did If I Can Help Somebody at the end. Well, at dinner later on, I think she was a Secret Service person who was accompanying Yolanda King. And she asked me, well, who was the singer? I said, I was. And she said, who sang Abraham, Martin, and John? I said, I did. She said, who sang If I Can Help Somebody? I said, I did. So evidently, you could tell the difference between me not knowing Abraham, Martin, and John well enough to If I Can Help Somebody, because she asked me a couple of times, who sang? And Dorothy Butler, she became a very good friend of mine. And at that time, she asked me, I think it was her, well, did you ever think about joining the Humanities Council? And I can't remember where I was in that. And she said, they would have paid you to come here today. So evidently, I had learned a little bit about volunteering because I went to Watertown from Rapid City. And I don't know if it's only to meet Yolanda King, but to also share my services. That's our program. And Three Voices, that's where we started with our Dakota Daughters presentation. It has had so many revolutions. And we have also had the opportunity to have it recorded through a grant with the South Dakota Humanities Council and working with Anna Marie Thatcher, and having a discussion and afterwards. And we also have the opportunity, and I hope it works out, to go to Arizona next year to share the Massacre of Wounded Knee presentation. Probably the most interesting, fulfilling event for me, which was not a part of the Humanities Council, was being the artist in residence for the National African American RVers Association. Campbell County Rockpile Museum invited me to be there for the entire week that the NAVRAS was going to be there. And I did Sarah Campbell the first day, Mary Kercheval the second day, Betty Blair, she's my newest character, and Lucretia Marchbanks on Friday. And I did that also for the NAVRA tea luncheon. And
Joyce,
yes,
maybe this is a good time to explain to some people may not know what a Chautauqua is. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is and why that's important?
Well, what I have done is learned about these people, and I tell their stories as if they were still living today. And at the conclusion of my telling their story, the audience can ask, for instance, Sarah Campbell about her life, and I will answer as if I were Sarah Campbell. And if there are questions like they would ask maybe Lucretia Marchbanks, or probably any of them, like, when did you die? Well, then that's when I break character and answer questions as Joyce Jefferson, the scholar, so that I can give them even more information that as a non-living person, they would not be able to do, especially like for Sarah Campbell. She died in 1888 and she never saw South Dakota become a state. So why is it important? I think it's important to bring yesterday with today, to know how people lived and what kinds of trials they may have had. Hopefully all of my characters had triumphs, and how, as we look back on their lives, we can incorporate it into our lives today so that we could make this place a better world. So thank you for interrupting me with that.
Sure. Now, do you get into, in the Chautauqua, do you get into the interaction? Okay, there's three of you in this representing three different cultural perspectives, and often different people, but what are we if we don't interact with other people? How do you deal with the interaction between your character and the other characters in which your character interacts with?
We made the play so that it was more monologues than dialogue. There are times in the story when we tell how we are interacting, like Miss Sadie, and we're talking about Dakota Daughters. When Miss Sadie needs someone to work for her because Lucy Long Eagle decided to leave her employment, she hires Maddie Elmira, who is my character. And there was only one scene where we actually interact with one another. But at the end of the play, Jerry Gozencenter takes the lead. She burns sage, and she asks the audience to participate in the blessings and a prayer for healing. And she blesses each of her sisters. She blesses the audience. And then we sing the pipe song. And the translation is, people look at me, people look at me. The pipe is sacred. The pipe is sacred. We shall all live. So we asked the audience to take the massacre of 1890 and learn from it so that we can benefit from what has happened in years past.
I want to remind the audience that this is actually an interactive program, especially for some of you who are joining us for the first time. And we like to give you, around this time, we like to give you a chance to ask questions that have come up for you, or comments, especially if you've seen Joyce or other Chautauquas. Can you, if you have questions, please sort of raise your hand or turn your mic on or something. Let us know that you have a question. So is there anyone at this time that has a question? Betty?
Yes. Hello, Joyce. I met you in Aberdeen, Brown County Fairgrounds last year when the League of Women Voters ladies were acting out some shenanigans in the street, and you came from the other end of the village and met us, and I knew you were special, but I didn't know who you were. And so this is exciting to me to see your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Betty. I remember you too. And I joined the women's suffrage movement that day, didn't I?
Yes, you sure did. You rounded us out beautifully. We had a photo session and everything.
Yes.
It was so exciting. Thank you. I'm just so happy to know you.
Thank you so much. And it was wonderful being with you that last year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can get together another time.
I'll be watching for that to happen. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Betty.
Anyone else have a comment or a question about Joyce or the Chautauqua or their interaction? Anybody else? Just turn your mic on and if you have something. Well, we'll continue. If you have a question, either put it in the chat if you don't feel like talking, but it's easier if you just unmic yourself, or I think there's a little thing that allows you to raise your hand, or just raise your hand, but you'll have to turn your camera on for me to see your if you raise your hand, and the camera's not on, I won't know it. But there is a way for you to do a react under reactions down at the bottom of the screen. It has a thing that says raise hand. If you click on that, a little pop-up screen will come. And if you raise your hand, then I'll try to see you with the screen up. Some of you are not seen. If I don't respond to you when you have your hand raised, turn your mic on, and then that should alert me that you're wanting to ask a question or make a comment. So to continue, Joyce, just so I make sure we don't forget this, you're going to have a presentation sometime in the near future in Watertown. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's going to be at the Goss, May 18th at 2:00 in the afternoon. And Lawrence and Susie Waite, have agreed to be our moderators. Sometimes at the end of our programming, we are just so exhausted that it's difficult for us to facilitate conversations. And we have invited the scholars, Lawrence Diggs and Susie Waite, to help us with that moderation. So we will be at the Goss, May 18th. That's a Wednesday. at 2:00 p.m. Oh, the Goss Opera House.
The
It's on
Goss
Main
Opera House.
Street.
Right.
Mhm.
Let's go back now to the Chautauqua, because I'd like to get a better understanding. I'd like to have our other participants have a better understanding of what makes the Chautauqua a unique experience as far as the performing experience. What does it bring to the table in terms of other ways that it affects an audience?
The last time that I presented Betty Blair, I was in Brookings, and I think the audience wanted to know more about the life during that time.
Mm.
And I know, not necessarily for a fact, that at the Sully County Colored Colony, as it was called during that time, that they were excluded from the entire community. However, they were not excluded to the so that they would not be participants in the community. I know that they probably all worked together when it was time to work together, but they did not have the kinds of relationships because of the time that we would be able to have today. I was, and I'm going to tell a story that does not take you back to the time, but it may be able to give you a little bit of insight about the time. When I was working on the Corporals, Cooks, and Cowboys exhibition, I felt that I had been neglecting my husband, and I invited him to lunch, and we went to this Chinese place. And we were the only two at this great big old round table for 6, and we were having a conversation. And there was another man at a different table who kept interrupting us. And I thought, oh man, is he rude or what? And then finally he said, you sound just like my father. And I looked at him for the first time, and he looked like a Euro-American. So how could my husband, Lawrence, who looked like you at the time, look like and sound like his father? So I had a little bit of more interest, and he introduced himself, and he said that he was Cecil Magruder. Now, Cecil Magruder had, I think he had 6 sons. They were all Cecil. So George Foreman didn't have anything on naming his children George. All of the children, all of the boys were Cecil, and they had a different middle name, so they would know which one Dad was looking for.
Cecil 1, Cecil 2, and Cecil 3?
No, it's like Cecil George, Cecil Lawrence, and Cecil Betty. I don't know.
But they're all the Cecils.
They were all Cecils at the time, yeah. And he showed me his driver's license so he would know that he was Cecil Magruder. Now, Cecil Magruder, as Betty Blair would tell you, bought the largest homestead, paid the most for his land, and probably was the largest sale that she had ever made. So even though he did not live as long as Betty did, he brought his family out, and they all had homesteads along the way. So I asked Cecil, well, did your uncles marry? He said, no. At that time, they were old codgers, bachelors, and there were not enough African Americans for them to have relationships with, so they all died bachelors. I'm pretty sure at this time that would not have been an issue. I also remember going to Mrs. Riggs' house. She owned property that the Kerchevals had owned. And the Kercheval family would come during the times when they needed to have work done. And she would serve all of the people. And more than likely, the Kerchevals would sit in a different location because they knew their place. And Mrs. Riggs, with tears in her eyes, said, "Do you know, when I washed his plate, I would wash it with hot water? I don't know why I did that." So at that time, without probably knowing it, she was admitting her racism. And at the time, the Kercheval young man who knew his place would not step across any barrier or any bar so that he could continue his life without conflict.
And that's your
Did
story.
I answer your question?
Well, I think you answered, I think, with the anecdote that you gave, and I'm looking actually for stories of how your interaction with people in a Chautauqua setting, how it impacts a community. So I think I would like to know more about that, especially if you have stories about how, when you interact with people, what was that like?
It varies. When I was at Custer, one of the participants came up to me and said that he always wanted to shake the hand of someone who knew Custer. And that was Sarah Campbell. When I was in Brookings last month, I think it was, nope, March, there was one gentleman in the audience who asked me in several different ways about the racism. And I'm thinking that perhaps I did not answer his question the way he wanted it to be answered, so he would ask it again. So I am doing more research about how they lived so that I could answer intelligently and as accurately as I can. I think we've got about 15 more minutes. And you see, for my daughter, not spam, I got this email. Yes, it said, for my daughter, not spam. And I asked myself, for my daughter, not spam? What is this? So I read the email and I got information that this young child in Illinois needed to have someone for her wax museum project. This person had to be from South Dakota, born in South Dakota, and tell their story. Well, I wrote back real quickly, I'm not from South Dakota. None of my characters are from South Dakota. We're born in South Dakota, so I can't help you. Well, the mother advocated for her daughter and said that I could be her influencer. So we did get together, and Lyric will be portraying Sarah Campbell. So
is Lyric the girl?
Huh?
Is Lyric, that's her name? Is that the girl's name? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And when she was a child, she would sing all the time. Well, she still is a child. She's in the 4th grade. And I just thought, what an honor that someone would think so much of me that they would think of me as their influencer and want to portray me as I portray others. And I think, yep, that's the end of
Yeah.
my presentation. So,
Well, thank you so much. Maybe I guess, Carol, could you bring the whole screen back, or how do we do that?
oh, I'll stop sharing.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. So,
And that was supposed to be a 15-minute presentation, but it looks like it was about 45 minutes.
yeah. Well, there's a 15 minutes left conversation.
Thank you,
Okay.
Betty.
So I'd like to open it up again to the audience. I have other questions, but Jace, did you have a question?
Hi, Joyce. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi,
Hi,
Jace.
everybody. Hey, I just wanted to share, Joyce and I shared an interesting experience when we were both at Fort Robinson years ago. And my cousin Wilmer Mesteth, who is now gone to the spirit world, but he had given a presentation on Crazy Horse. And we were at a monument there, or a kind of a dedication to Crazy Horse near the cabins where he had been killed. And my sons put down tobacco at the monument in prayer. And it was very moving for all of us. But Joyce got back to me later, and she sent a copy of a poem that she had written from her experience there. And it was really a kind of a simultaneous, well, we both experienced something very emotional there, because I had written a poem too on Crazy Horse. So we shared our poetry, and but she was very, she asked me, she was concerned because she was wondering why these young men were putting cigarettes near near a monument. And so what I guess the point is that what I'm saying is we learn from one another in the South Dakota Humanities presentations, and just as we do on these conversations here, you know, we and that education, I think, is really the key thing, and that's what Joyce has been doing. She's been educating folks about things that many of us probably wouldn't even be exposed to if Joyce had not done her research and shared with us. So I just wanted to share that with the folks. Joyce and I go a long way back.
Yeah, both of us were in school together. We went to a non-traditional school at Ellsworth Air Force Base. And I don't know about you, Jace, but it only took me 12 years to get my 4-year degree.
Hey,
Well,
it's not given to the swift or the strong, but he who endures to the end. At least that's
right.
what I'm told. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you, before I go into that, anyone else have any questions or comments that they would like to add to this conversation? I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity, because I like to get many different opinions and viewpoints. Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the kind of stories you tell. That is to ask, why do you choose one character over another, or one story to tell over another? What goes into that?
When I first started with Phenomenal Woman and Other Heroines, which is now Phenomenal Woman and Other Sheroes, it was a 10-minute presentation. I wanted to tell about my culture, a little bit about what I had to offer my community. And I think it started out with a poem. No, it started out with a song. And I had not practiced with the song.
Mhm.
So when they introduced me, the audience started to applaud, and I was sitting in the audience, and they wouldn't stop clapping because I wasn't up there on the stage. And oh, my insides were just, so churned up. And finally they did stop clapping, and I started to sing. And all through the entire presentation, I was just I don't know. But it ended up a half an hour presentation. And I not only was able to tell about my culture, I was able to share poetry that I love and tell the history of my world from an African-American perspective. And I think that's probably something that not everybody knows about. As a matter of fact, when I do a lot of my presentations, not many people will ask about the Buffalo Soldier. They'll ask about the Native American, they'll ask about the Euro-American, but they don't have enough information to ask about the Buffalo Soldier. So now I have decided what I need to do in that event is lead the conversation so they will know more about what the Buffalo Soldier and his family had to offer, more than what they received in the play, so that it will be, or the Buffalo Soldier will be a part of their memory along with the Native American and Euro-American stories.
So in this area too, you know, I live up near Sisseton, and this area too, there was a lot of activity by Buffalo Soldiers. And I really hadn't, other than some Bob Marley songs, I really hadn't known much about the Buffalo Soldiers before I came to South Dakota. But I also learned that there were other people, there were other actors. It wasn't just the soldiers. Even before the soldiers, there were other people who were coming from all different parts of the country. Have you looked at any of those, or do they somehow get wound in your stories or your
They
presentation?
don't usually get involved in the stories. However, we were able to share that kind of information with our exhibition of Corporals, Cooks, and Cowboys. There's one story about the miners, prospectors who came, and everybody was digging down in Deadwood, and there were 5 African Americans and 1 Irishman, and they wanted to know where a good spot was. And somebody, I'm pretty sure he was just making a joke, said, well, you go up there on that hill and you dig there, that's a good spot. And it was April, it was snowy, it was probably unmanageable. The ice, it was ice where you needed to have water. And eventually, when they did hit pay dirt, they had the largest find of any of the other ones, even the ones who were down in Deadwood. So it's sort of like sometimes when your racism gets in the way, it's also a blessing for somebody else. So there are stories like that, but like I wasn't able to tell this one that well. I don't include them unless I practice them a little bit beforehand.
Okay. Well, it's always interesting to me about history is that it's not in little boxes by itself. It's always intertwined with other things. And there's lots more under the hood, you know, why people do one thing or another is always very interesting to me. And it also points out to, like, every day we're actually making history. It reminds me of that. It's like we may just think we're living in the now, but though we are, we're actually making history. So I think it's important not only to look at history from the vantage point of what we can learn, but also as a model for reminding us that we are in the present making history. And we're getting right up next to the end of our program. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the people who joined us today, and certainly to thank you, Joyce. And I look forward to joining you in Watertown and harassing the people there as well. Because I think it'll be fun. I invite the others who, if you can make it, to join us as well. Can you tell people where they can find out about the details?
Probably on the South Dakota Humanities Council's website.
Okay.
I have a web page, but I don't have any events listed yet.
Okay.
Perhaps I should do that, but I can write it down here.
In the chat. But I think if people go to the South Dakota Humanities website, because we're kind of out of time now, but if you go to the website, you should be able to find it. Jennifer has put the Humanities website in the chat. So maybe if you don't know how to do that, that is, you click on the chat, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, there are 3 little dots. If you click on that dot, you can do something called save the chat. That'll go to your computer, or you can cut and paste the information in the chat by just kind of dragging over it, and drag what you want. Do a Command C or Control C if you're on a PC, and then paste it wherever you like, and then you'll have it and you can participate in that. Again, thank you, Joyce, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank everyone else for joining us, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.